In this section on Python loops, we are going to walk through how we can iterate over collections of data inside of our Python programs. And in this guide, we are going to take a look at three key types of data structures that we can loop through, and we're going to utilize the same type of looping mechanism for each one of them. So right here, as you can see, I have a basic list of strings. And if I want to loop over each one of these, I'm going to use what is called a for in loop. So I can say for, and then this first element I'm going to give might look a little bit confusing because it looks like I'm just making it up. And in a second, it's going to make sense on how we can use this. But I'm going to say for player in players, follow that by a colon, and then hit return. Now, it's very key that if you are using a text editor that doesn't automatically indent for you, that you do have at least 2 or 4 spaces here on the left-hand side. I'll show you why that is needed here in a second, and it's because Python does force you to utilize indentation for code blocks. So for this, I'm going to say for player in players, and I simply want to print out each one of these items. So now if I call this, you will see that it prints out each one of the strings, Altuve all the way through Gaddis. Now before we go on to tuples or dictionaries, let's take a step back and see exactly what is going on right here. So this player, this is a common convention whenever you're iterating over a collection like we are right here. So the word players is the variable. So this is a direct mapping to players right here. So this, we need to keep the name here identical because this is the collection we're iterating over. However, this first variable right here, this is a block variable or an iterator variable, depending on your preference. With this could be named anything. And so there's nothing specific about using the word player here. If I said X and then change this to X, then this would still work. So if I run this, you can see that it still works exactly the same way. So what you define here is completely up to you. What it represents is that each time that this loop goes through and it iterates, it is going to change the value for the iterator variable. So the first time that it iterates, that X, and I'm going to change this back to player, and I'll say why here in a second, but this player variable here, this block variable, is going to be equal to Altuve. Then when the for loop goes through again, then the player variable is going to be equal to Bregman. Then it's going to be Correa and then Gaddis. And so on and so forth. If you had a million items that you were iterating over, the player value here would change a million times. Now the common convention whenever you are using a for in loop, just like we're doing here, is that if you have a collection that has a plural name, then the block variable that you are going to use should be named with a singular word of this plural collection. So if we have the word like we have right here, players, and this is the name of the collection, then player is a great name for the block variable. Imagine a scenario where you had a different kind of collection. So say that you had some geometry kind of problem and you were iterating over a set of squares. You could say for square in squares, and this would be the common convention. Notice how we have a plural here, which this is a collection, and then our block variable is just the singular form of that. And that is the common convention that you're going to use whenever you're using for in loops. So this is how you can iterate over a list. Now, if we change this list and we change this to be a tuple, it will work exactly the same way. And that's one of the very nice things about working with tuples and lists is they do have a bit of shared performance and behavior. So if I hit run now, you can see this works exactly the same way. So you can work with both of those data structures and treat them very similar when it comes to looping. Now I'm going to get rid of all of this, and now let's talk about how we can work with dictionaries. So I'm going to create a player's dictionary here, and inside of it I'm going to set up a series of key value pairs. So I'm going to have second base, and this one's going to be Altuve, and then I'll have third base. This one will be Bregman, and then shortstop, this one will be Correa. And our last one here will be the DH, and this one will be Gaddis. So very similar to what we had with the list, but now we are using a key value dictionary. So now if we want to loop through this type of data structure, the syntax we're going to use for our for in loop is very similar, except now, as you might imagine, we have a couple different elements here to work with. We're not only working with a list item, so we're not working with a single element. Now we need to grab the key and the value, and there's a way to do that where I can say for, and now instead of just giving one block variable, I'm going to supply two words here. So I'm going to say position and then player in players dot items, and this is a function, and remember that, and this should be a colon right here. And so remember when we discuss the items function, remember items allows us to create a view into our dictionary. So it gives us access to get all of the items, and because of how a for in loop works, we can pass two variables here, and Python is going to be smart enough to separate it out. So the very first time that it iterates through, the very first item is going to be assigned with the position right here. So our block variable position is going to be equal to the key, which is second base, and then player is going to be equal to the value, which in this case is Altuve. The next time, players or position is going to be third base, and player is going to be Bregman, and all the way down the list. And we can test this out. So I can say here, print position, and here I'm just giving a string, and now I'm using the actual block variable. And let's just copy this, and now I'll say player name, and this will now say player. And now let's run this and see if this is working. And it is. You can see the first iteration has position of second base and the player name of Altuve. So this is working perfectly. Now, one little thing I want to point out before we finish this guide is the importance of indentation. So right here, imagine that I wrote this for loop, but I didn't have print indented, just like this. You are going to have an error if you try to run this. And REPL will give you a little syntax error X right here. But if you're using some other type of local development environment that doesn't have these kinds of checkers, then you are going to run into an odd error called an indentation error. And I'll run it right now and you'll see it. And you can see it says indentation error, expected an indented block. So whenever you see this colon in Python, you will most likely need to have the next set of code. So anything inside of this is called a code block. And so you will have to have all of the rest of the code indented with either 2 spaces or 4 spaces. Most text editors will do this automatically, so you don't really have to worry about it much, but we haven't talked about indentation when it comes to Python, and so I wanted to make sure that you are aware of that.